The words hit me like a slap across the face, delivered with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing them for weeks. Margaret, I think it's best if you don't come around anymore. David and I need space to build our own family without interference. I stood in the doorway of what had been my son's apartment, clutching a casserole dish that suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Behind Rachel, I could see David hovering in the living room, his eyes fixed on the floor like a guilty child. 28 years of raising him and he couldn't even look me in the eye? I'm sorry? I managed, though I'd heard her perfectly. Rachel's voice had that particular tone that wealthy young women perfect in finishing school. Sweet as honey, sharp as a blade. You heard me. Her smile never wavered, but her perfectly manicured fingers tightened on the doorframe. This constant dropping by, bringing food, offering advice. It's suffocating. We're adults. We can take care of ourselves. I glanced past her again, hoping David would speak up, would defend me, would remember who had worked 3 jobs to put him through college. Instead, he just stood there, a 30-year-old man reduced to a silent statue by his wife of 8 months. Was just bringing dinner, I said quietly, holding up the casserole dish. David mentioned you'd been working late, and I thought, that's exactly the problem. Rachel's voice grew colder. You think, you assume, you insert yourself into our lives without being asked. It needs to stop. The autumn wind whipped through the apartment complex courtyard, and I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. The same cardigan I'd bought at Walmart 3 years ago, back when every penny mattered. Not that it didn't still matter, but Rachel didn't need to know about the recent changes in my financial situation. Rachel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. She stepped back, making it clear I wasn't welcome inside. We're building a life together, and we can't do that with you constantly hovering. The unannounced visits, the criticism disguised as advice, the way you undermine me in my own home. It stops now. Criticism? Undermining? I thought back to our last interaction, when I'd gently suggested that maybe David shouldn't work 70-hour weeks while she pursued her wellness blog. Apparently, that constituted undermining. And David agrees with this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Finally, my son found his voice. Mom, maybe it would be better if you called before coming over. We're trying to establish boundaries. Boundaries. The word every therapist and self-help guru loved to throw around, as if my love for my only child was some kind of invasion rather than the force that had shaped his entire existence. Of course, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I understand completely, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms had become a man who couldn't defend his mother to his wife. I didn't understand how bringing homemade meals and offering grandmother's wisdom had become intrusions worthy of banishment. Rachel's expression softened slightly, perhaps sensing she'd won. I'm sure you understand, Margaret. You were young, once. You know how important it is for newlyweds to have their space. Young once. As if I were some ancient relic rather than a 53-year-old woman who had sacrificed everything to give her son the opportunities she'd never had. As if my own marriage hadn't ended precisely because my ex-husband couldn't handle the responsibility of fatherhood, leaving me to raise David alone. I'll just leave this on the doorstep, I said, setting down the casserole dish. Green bean casserole, with the crispy onions on top, David's favorite since he was 7 years old. That's very thoughtful, Rachel replied, though we both knew she'd probably throw it away the moment I left. She was always going on about clean eating and toxins, as if my grandmother's recipes were some kind of poison. I turned to walk away, then paused. David, I love you. Both of you. I hope you know that. My son finally met my eyes, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. I love you too, Mom. We need this right now. I nodded and walked back to my car, a 10-year-old, Honda Civic that had seen better days. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Rachel in my rearview mirror, watching from the doorway like a sentry guarding her territory. The irony wasn't lost on me as I pulled into traffic. The apartment they were so desperate to protect their privacy in, the place where they were building their precious boundaries, I'd been paying for it for the past year and a half. It had started innocently enough. David had graduated with his engineering degree and landed his first real job, but the salary wasn't quite enough to cover the rent on the nice apartment Rachel had insisted they needed. "It's in a good neighborhood," she'd explained to me over coffee, back when she still tolerated my presence. "Close to David's work, near good schools for when we have children." Children. The grandchildren I might never get to see if tonight was any indication. David had been too proud to ask for help directly, but I'd seen the stress lines around his eyes, the way he'd started buying generic groceries and skipping his monthly dinner with me. So I'd done what any mother would do. I'd helped. Quietly, discreetly, through a management company that handled the transaction. Every month, $1,800 transferred from my account to cover their rent. They thought David's salary covered everything. They had no idea that his mother, the supposedly broke, intrusive woman they'd just banned from their home, was the reason they had a roof over their heads. I pulled into my own driveway, staring up at the modest 2-story house where David had grown up. After his father left, I'd worked as a school secretary, cleaned offices on weekends, and waited tables on Thursday nights just to keep this place. Every sacrifice had been worth it to give David stability, to make sure he never felt the chaos I'd experienced growing up in foster care. The house was quiet now, too quiet. I'd grown accustomed to David dropping by unannounced, raiding my refrigerator, sprawling on the couch while we watched old movies together. Those days were apparently over, thanks to Rachel's need for boundaries. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table where David had done his homework for years. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a school bus, was the last photo of the three of us together, David's wedding day. I looked happy in the picture, genuinely thrilled to see my son starting his new life. Rachel looked radiant in her designer dress, every inch the perfect bride. If only I'd known then what I know now. The wedding had been a lavish affair, paid for entirely by Rachel's parents. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. Her mother served on charity boards and collected art. They'd made it subtly clear that David was marrying up, that he should be grateful for their daughter's attention. I'd bitten my tongue through the entire reception, watching them treat my son like some kind of charity case who'd gotten lucky. But David was happy, and that's all that mattered to me. Or so I told myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe David was reaching out. Maybe he'd realized how unfairly I'd been treated. Instead, it was a notification from my bank about an automatic transfer. The monthly rent payment had gone through. I stared at the notification for a long moment, then opened my laptop. The property management website showed that David and Rachel's lease was up for renewal in 2 months. They probably didn't even know. David had never been good with administrative details, and Rachel seemed to think such mundane concerns were beneath her. An idea began to form in my mind, small at first, but growing stronger with each passing minute. I pulled up my contact list and found the number for my lawyer, Janet Morrison. We'd worked together when David's father had tried to contest the divorce settlement years ago. Janet was sharp, ethical, and most importantly, discreet. It was after 9 p.m., but Janet had always told her clients to call if they needed anything, regardless of the hour. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Margaret? Is everything all right? I need some advice," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "About property law and lease agreements." "Of course. What's the situation?" I explained everything. The rent payments, the banishment, Rachel's attitude, David's cowardice. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or disapproval. "So, legally speaking," I concluded. What are my options? There was a long pause. Well, that depends on what you want to accomplish. Are you looking to hurt them, help them, or teach them a lesson? I considered the question carefully. What did I want? I wanted my son back, obviously. I wanted Rachel to treat me with the respect I'd earned. I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't just dismiss the people who love you without paying a price. I want them to understand what they've lost, I said finally. I want them to realize that my love and support wasn't an intrusion. It was a gift. In that case, Janet said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, I think we need to have a meeting. Can you come in tomorrow? Absolutely. Good. Bring all the documentation about the rent payments, the lease agreement if you have access to it, and any other financial support you've provided. We're going to explore your options very thoroughly. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, thinking about the choice ahead of me. I could continue paying their rent silently, being the generous mother who swallowed her pride for the sake of peace. I could cut off the payments immediately and let them face the consequences. Or I could do something more strategic. The casserole dish was probably sitting on their doorstep, getting cold in the autumn air. Green bean casserole with crispy onions, made with love and rejected, with cruelty. Tomorrow I would start planning my response to that rejection. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve. I grieved for the relationship I'd thought I had with my son, for the grandmother I might never get to be, for the family dinners that would never happen, for the holidays that would be spent alone. And as I sat there in the darkness, one thought kept echoing in my mind. They had no idea what they'd just given up. But they were about to find out. The next morning brought new clarity along with the sunrise. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Janet. Nothing too flashy, but professional. Enough to command respect. The woman in the mirror looked tired but determined, someone who had been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. My phone rang as I was gathering my documents. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe he'd had second thoughts. Maybe he'd realized how horrible Rachel had been. Hi, sweetheart, I answered, unable to keep the hope out of my voice. Hey, Mom. His voice was strained, careful. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. Last night was... I know it was hard. I'm fine, David. Really. Good. That's good. He paused, and I could hear Rachel's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Listen, Mom. I think this could be really good for all of us. You know, healthy boundaries and all that. Healthy boundaries. He was parroting her words now, probably at her insistence. Of course, I said smoothly. I think you're absolutely right. This gives us all a chance to reassess things. Exactly. I'm glad you understand. The relief in his voice was painful to hear. He'd expected me to fight, to beg, to make a scene. Instead, I was giving him exactly what he thought he wanted. I do understand, David. More than you know. Great. So maybe we can talk next week? I'll call you. That sounds perfect. Take care of yourself. After he hung up, I sat with my phone for a moment, processing the conversation. He'd called to assuage his guilt, to make sure his mother wasn't falling apart. Well, I wasn't falling apart. I was getting organized. Janet's office was in a sleek downtown building, the kind of place that screamed competence and success. She'd built an impressive practice from nothing, just like I'd built a life for David from nothing. We understood each other. Margaret, she greeted me with a warm hug. You look terrible. Thank you for that brutal honesty, I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had since last night. Come on, let's see what we're working with. I spread out my documents on her conference table, bank statements showing the monthly transfers, correspondence, with the property management company, receipts for other financial support I'd provided over the years. Janet reviewed everything methodically, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is quite a paper trail," she said finally. "You've been supporting them financially for how long?" 18 months of rent, plus I paid for David's car repairs. Last spring, helped with Rachel's student loan payments when her blog wasn't generating income. Bought them furniture when they first moved in together. I trailed off, realizing how long the list was. "And they have no idea about any of this?" "David thinks his salary covers everything. Rachel certainly doesn't know. She'd probably die of embarrassment if she found out her mother-in-law was subsidizing their lifestyle." Janet leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "Oh, Margaret, we have options. So many delicious options." She outlined the legal possibilities: immediate cessation of support, formal demand for repayment, restructuring the lease arrangement to put me on as a co-signer. Each option had different implications, different timelines, different levels of impact. "But here's what I'm thinking," Janet continued, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "You don't just want to hurt them financially. You want them to understand what they've lost. You want them to realize their mistake and come crawling back, appreciating you the way they should have all along." "Exactly. Then we need to be strategic. We need to let them dig their own grave and then hand them a shovel." She outlined her plan, and with each detail, I felt something dark and satisfied unfurling in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, though that would certainly get their attention. It was about forcing them to confront the reality of their situation, to understand exactly how much they'd taken for granted. "The timing is crucial," Janet explained. "Their lease renewal is in 8 weeks. We let them get comfortable thinking. They're independent. Let them start making plans for their future. Then, 6 weeks from now, we drop the bomb." I thought about David's voice that morning, so relieved that I was being understanding about their boundaries. Rachel's satisfied smirk as she'd dismissed me from their doorstep. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully cut the cord without consequences. They had no idea that the cord they'd cut was the only thing keeping them afloat. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing dramatic. Just live your life. Don't contact them. Don't drop by. Don't send care packages. Let them have exactly what they asked for. Complete independence from intrusive Margaret." I nodded, understanding the psychology behind it. They expected me to be devastated, to keep trying to insert myself into their lives. Instead, I would give them silence, space, exactly what they claim to want. "And when they start to struggle?" I asked. "They will," Janet assured me. "Trust me, they will. When they can't make rent, when they're facing eviction, when their perfect little life starts crumbling, that's when we reveal the truth. That's when they'll understand exactly what they threw away." I left Janet's office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since David had gotten serious with Rachel, I felt like I had some control over the situation. I wasn't just a victim being pushed around by a spoiled young woman and her enabler husband. I was a player in this game, and I was about to change the rules. The next 6 weeks were going to be interesting indeed. The hardest part wasn't cutting off the money. It was cutting off myself. 3 weeks had passed since that awful night. On their doorstep, and my phone sat silent on the kitchen counter like an accusation. No calls from David checking in, no texts asking about my week, no last-minute invitations to dinner. The silence I'd been asked to provide was apparently exactly what they wanted. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and opened my laptop to check my bank account. The automatic transfer to Prestige Property Management had been canceled 2 days ago, right on schedule. In 5 weeks, when David and Rachel's rent came due, they would discover that their financial cushion had evaporated. But for now, they remained blissfully unaware, living in their bubble of manufactured independence. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Haven't seen David's car in your driveway lately. Everything okay?" I stared at the message. for a long moment before typing back, "He's just busy with married life. You know how it is." But Mrs. Chen didn't know how it was, because Mrs. Chen's son called her every Sunday, brought his children over for Saturday dinners, and treated his mother like the treasure she was instead of an inconvenience to be managed. The doorbell rang, interrupting my spiral into self-pity. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver holding a large floral arrangement. For a wild moment, I thought David might have sent an apology, but the card bore the letterhead of Morrison and Associates. "Congratulations on your new freedom." Janet's note read, "Phase 1 complete. Enjoy the next few weeks. They're going to be fascinating to watch." The flowers were beautiful. White roses and blue delphiniums arranged in a crystal vase that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I set them on the dining room table where David used to do his homework, their elegance a stark contrast to the Walmart furniture and discount store decorations that filled my modest home. Janet was right about one thing. The next few weeks were indeed fascinating to watch, though watch was perhaps too strong a word. I wasn't spying on them, wasn't driving by their apartment or lurking on their social media. I didn't need to. The information came to me through the natural network of connections that exists in any small community. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store mentioned that she'd seen David buying generic everything during his last shopping trip. "Even generic cereal," she'd whispered conspiratorially. "And you know how picky he used to be about his breakfast." My former colleague Sandra spotted them at the discount theater on a Tuesday night. "They used to go to the nice theater downtown," she told me during our monthly coffee date. "Remember when David took you to see that musical there for your birthday? Now they're watching 2-month-old movies in plastic seats." The observations accumulated like evidence in a case I wasn't building but couldn't ignore. Rachel's Instagram posts, which had once featured expensive brunches and boutique shopping trips, now showcased cozy nights in and discovering the joy of home cooking. The photos were artfully composed to look intentional, but I could read between the lines. When someone who's never cooked anything more complicated than avocado toast suddenly starts posting pictures of pasta with marinara sauce, finances are tight. But the most telling sign came from an unexpected source. David's coworker, Mike, who happened to be married to my dentist's receptionist. The connection was tenuous enough that the information felt accidental rather than gossipy. Mike mentioned that David's been picking up extra shifts, Lisa told me while scheduling my next cleaning. Apparently, he's been staying late every night, working on some side projects to bring in additional income. Mike's worried he's burning himself out. I nodded sympathetically while my heart performed a complex dance of vindication and concern. David had always been a hard worker, but he'd also always been smart about work-life balance. The fact that he was suddenly desperate for extra income meant their carefully budgeted lifestyle was starting to crack. Phase 1 of Janet's plan was working perfectly. They were getting exactly what they'd asked for. Complete independence. From intrusive Margaret, no more casseroles, no more unannounced visits, no more well-meaning advice, and apparently no more mysterious financial cushion that had been keeping their heads above water. I found myself developing new routines to fill the David-shaped hole in my schedule. Tuesday evenings, when I used to have dinner with him, I started attending a book club at the library. Thursday nights, when he used to help me with yard work, I hired a neighborhood teenager and spent the evening learning to paint watercolors. Saturday mornings, our traditional breakfast time, became my volunteer hours at the animal shelter. The changes were good for me, I had to admit. For years, my social life had revolved around my son and his needs. Now, I was rediscovering interests I'd set aside, making new friends, building a life that didn't depend entirely on being needed by David. But I missed him. God, I missed him. I missed his laugh when I told him stories about the kids at school where I'd worked. I missed the way he'd raid my refrigerator like he was still 17, making elaborate sandwiches while telling me about his projects at work. I missed having someone to cook for, someone who appreciated my old-fashioned recipes and asked for seconds. Most of all, I missed feeling like I mattered to him. The fourth week brought an unexpected development. My book club was discussing Little Fires Everywhere when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost declined the call, but something made me excuse myself and answer. "Is this Margaret Coleman?" The voice was professional, efficient. "This is Patricia Williams from Prestige Property Management. I'm calling about Unit 2B at Maple Grove Apartments. You're listed as the emergency contact for David Coleman?" My pulse quickened. "Yes, that's my son. Is everything all right?" "Well, there's been some confusion about his rent payment. It was due yesterday, and we haven't received it. When we contacted Mr. Coleman, he seemed surprised and insisted that his rent was automatically paid. He gave us your number saying, 'You might know something about the payment arrangement.'" I closed my eyes, picturing David's face when he realized his rent hadn't been paid. The panic, the confusion, the dawning realization that something was very wrong with his carefully balanced finances. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not sure how I can help with that. Have you spoken with David directly about setting up a new payment method?" "We're trying to reach him now, but his phone seems to be going to voicemail. The thing is, Mrs. Coleman, we've had some irregularities with this account. Our records show that the payments have been coming from a different source than Mr. Coleman indicated, and now those payments have stopped entirely." Patricia Williams was fishing, trying to figure out what had happened to their reliable rent payments. I could help her understand, could explain the situation, and potentially save David from late fees and complications. But that would defeat the entire purpose of the lesson he needed to learn. "I'm afraid I can't help you with David's financial arrangements," I said firmly. "He's a grown man, and he and his wife handle their own affairs. I'm sure they'll sort it out." "Of course. We'll keep trying to reach them. Thank you for your time." After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the library for several minutes, staring at my phone. Within the hour, David would probably call me in a panic, asking if I knew anything about his rent payment. He'd be confused, desperate, probably embarrassed. Part of me wanted to rush over there immediately to fix the problem and make everything better. But Janet's voice echoed in my mind. Let them dig their own grave, and then hand them a shovel. When my phone finally rang 2 hours later, David's name flashing on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. Then I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and listened to the message. "Mom? Hey, it's me. There's some kind of mix-up with our rent payment, and the property management company mentioned they called you? I'm not sure why they do that, but if you know anything about it, could you call me back? We're trying to figure out what happened, and it's kind of urgent. Thanks." His voice was tight with stress, trying to sound casual but failing completely. I saved the message and didn't call back. He tried 3 more times over the next 2 days. Each voicemail was progressively more frantic, more desperate. By the 3rd call, he wasn't even pretending to be casual. "Mom, I really need you to call me back. Something's really wrong with our finances, and I can't figure out what happened. The rent thing is just the beginning. Apparently there have been payments I didn't know about, and now they've stopped, and I don't understand any of it. Please, just call me. I need help." The 4th message came at 11 p.m. on Thursday. David's voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "Mom, I know you said you wanted space, and I respect that. But this is an emergency. We might get evicted if we can't figure this out by Monday. I've been over our budget 100 times and the numbers don't add up. Something's been covering our shortfall for months and now it's gone, and I'm scared. Please, I'll do anything. Just help me understand. What's happening?" I played that message 3 times, each repetition driving the knife of his desperation deeper into my heart. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? For him to need me, to realize that his independence was an illusion, to understand that cutting me out of his life had consequences. So why did it feel so terrible? I called Janet the next morning, my resolve wavering. He sounds really scared, I told her after playing the messages. Maybe we should… Margaret. Janet's voice was firm but kind. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. He's learning that actions have consequences. If you cave now, if you rush in to save him, he'll never truly understand what he put you through. But what if they actually get evicted? They won't. David's a smart kid with a good job. He'll figure out how to make it work, even if it means giving up some of the lifestyle they've gotten used to. The question is, do you want him to learn this lesson now, or do you want to enable this pattern for the rest of your life? I knew. She was right. This wasn't just about rent money or wounded feelings. This was about the fundamental dynamic between David and me, about whether I would always be the one giving while he took my support for granted. What's the next phase? I asked. Patience. Let them scramble for another week or two. Let them really feel the weight of their situation. Then, when they're truly desperate, we reveal the truth in a way that makes our point crystal clear. That weekend, I kept myself busy with painting class and volunteering at the animal shelter. I didn't answer David's calls, though they came, with increasing frequency. I didn't drive by their apartment to see if they were okay. I didn't check Rachel's social media for clues about their state of mind. Instead, I focused on the watercolor landscape I was working on, a peaceful lake scene with mountains in the background. The instructor, a patient woman named Eleanor, praised my use of color and encouraged me to trust my instincts. Art is about knowing when to add more and when to leave well enough alone, she said, watching me debate whether to add another layer of blue to the sky. Sometimes the most powerful statement is made by restraint. Her words echoed in my mind as I drove home. Sometimes the most powerful statement is made by restraint. Maybe this silence, this absence, was exactly the statement David needed to hear. My phone buzzed with a text as I pulled into my driveway. Not from David this time, but from Rachel. Her first contact since that awful night on their doorstep. Margaret, I know we said we needed space, but we're having some financial difficulties that we can't explain. David thinks you might know something about our rent situation? If you could please call him back, we'd really appreciate it. Even in crisis, she couldn't bring herself to apologize or acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong about not needing me. The text was polite, but still carried that undertone of entitlement, as if my help was something they could demand rather than request. I deleted the message without responding. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, surrounded by the silence they'd requested. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. The constant low-level anxiety I'd carried for months, wondering if David was okay, if Rachel approved of me, if I was doing enough or too much, had been replaced by something steadier. I was taking care of myself for the first time in years, and it felt surprisingly good. My phone rang one more time before I went to bed. David. Again, of course. This time I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Mom. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. I know. I got your messages. Then why didn't you call back? We're in real trouble here, and I don't understand what's happening. I took a deep breath, channeling the calm I'd found in watercolor. Class? David, you and Rachel made it very clear that you needed space from me. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. But this is different. This is an emergency. Is it? Or is this just the natural consequence of the independence you wanted? There was a long pause. What does that mean? It means, sweetheart, that you're getting exactly what you demanded. Complete autonomy. No interference from your mother. Isn't this what you wanted? Mom, please, don't do this. We're going to lose our apartment. Then I suggest you figure out how to pay for it. You're adults, remember? You can take care of yourselves. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. Phase 2 was about to begin, and this time, David and Rachel would learn exactly what they'd lost when they decided they didn't need intrusive Margaret anymore. The truth was coming, and it was going to change everything.